Hi everyone, this is Neil. I hope you all are doing well and that your classes are going great. I wanted to share with you all some research that I've been doing this last quarter. I started this in the summer of 2019 and I'm just now finishing up an article draft about it. I was supposed to present about this at the Teaching and Learning Symposium, but uh, just ran out of time to do that. So I'm really grateful for the opportunity to talk about this with you all today. So I've been working on a project about the rhetorical role that syllabi play when students have conversations about disability with their instructors. And I made a presentation for you all that makes that research really specific to what we've been talking about as a group. So I want to just start off with an overview. So first, I want to thank Anna and Kristen for giving me the space to present this work, and I'm really eager to hear from you all about what you're thinking. I'll start with a little introduction to this work. I guess I already kind of did that, so maybe we can skip that point. And then I want to talk about the two main modes that I observed students using the syllabi rhetorically. So in this case, the students that I talked with really saw syllabi as a way to understand how their professors were both using power in the classroom and also how proficient they were with disability accommodation. So, what was written in the syllabus was thus a really important cipher for students to figure that out. Additionally, as a sort of second tool, they often use the syllabus to script conversations about disability accommodations with their instructors. At the end of this, I'm going to give a little bit of tailored to our group implications for what I think this means. So, to start us off with the introduction, I want to give you a little background about the larger project this is drawn from. This is based on my current book project work where I collected 20 interviews with disabled students and talked with them about their experience of learning how to write in college. In this process, I asked them a lot of open ended questions around kind of three main topics. I asked them to describe their writing process, I asked them to describe their experiences with disability in writing classes, and I also asked them to give suggestions to peers and teachers about how to work with students with disabilities. So that created a lot of data across many different themes. I also just want to note that I was intentionally broad with how I defined disability and did not focus on one specific type of disability. I often get asked about that. The purpose of doing so was to see, are there common rhetorical strategies that students employ across different kinds of disability diagnosis? And also, is there some kind of disability solidarity happening with students, which I did see traces of throughout my research. So this particular project really emerged from a broader conversation that's happening now in composition and rhetoric about the role that syllabi plays. So we've had some big articles come out in our flagship journal about exactly what our group has been discussing, how to use universal design principles to design syllabi. But part of what I'm interested in is how students actually experience these measures or the lack of those measures. There isn't actually a lot of research about student experience when it comes to disability across different fields. So neither in CompRet nor in communication studies that I can find, nor in education studies, which is often where you see the most student experience research. It's a big gap. So that kind of became my question. How did disabled students experience syllabi? I want to do a quick note on my research methods since we're an interdisciplinary group. I extracted interview segments where students discuss syllabi to form a new data set. I had about 11 of the 20 students I interviewed mention or discuss at length syllabi. And then I kind of started from the drawing board. I did 3 rounds of coding with those segments to develop categories. instead of trying to refine codes I had already used for the previous larger project. I want to note that it's important. I didn't have access to the syllabi that students were discussing, and also students were talking in the retrospect instead of at the current moment. And I couldn't follow up to interview instructors involved to get their perspective as well. So this is definitely really focused on student experience and doesn't capture the kind of intense power dynamics that instructors face as they negotiate how to write this genre, which we have talked a little bit about in our group this quarter or this year. So here are my key findings. The first is that students really see the syllabus as a signal for instructors' proficiency with disability. So they often looked for explicit and implicit cues that signaled that their instructor was knowledgeable about the needs of disabled students. So an explicit cue might be directly mentioning disability in the syllabus. Implicit cues might be something more like the formatting that we are talking about in our group, or also policies like lenient extension policies, not having a required attendance policy. That's different for us in the UW system since we cannot grade on attendance, but was true at the study site where I collected the data. Not having a disability statement, which several students mentioned, really signaled to them a deep lack of basic knowledge about disability. Not just that they didn't know about disability and like how to work with disabled students, but that they weren't aware of the institutional resources that they could take advantage of to help students. So that was a big problem that several students pointed out. And then some students also discussed how when they encountered outdated language, this also signaled to them that their instructor wouldn't know how to work with them very well. So one interviewee in particular had a syllabus where the professor addressed the disabled students as challenged students. And he found this very troubling, and it made it difficult for him to ask for what he needed from his professor. Even though that encounter ended up going really well for him, it still kind of hung over the encounter and impacted how he experienced that class. So this is something that particularly folks who are not in the disability community, and even frankly for those of us who are, you kind of have to stay on top of that changing language as it evolves throughout as the cultural politics of disability change. My second finding is that students really read the syllabus to understand power in the classroom. And I say students here, not just disabled students, because both the students that I talked with mentioned both how they used it and also how other students who were not disabled used it, which I'll talk about in a bit. So the kind of style issues and also the policies that are set out in the syllabus teach students a lot about how we're approaching power. So particularly like tone and language were really important. So a lot of students would say, like, if a professor had a very strong no laptop policy, for instance, that would impact whether or not they might talk to them about their disability needs. And it also helped them kind of map like how their instructor saw their relationship to their students in the classroom. One interesting finding was that moments where faculty take time to co-construct syllabi and course policies. So we often talk about this in IAS as like setting community guidelines or turning the participation requirements over to the class to determine what should count as participation. These moments where we're trying to give power back to students can often disempower disabled students unintentionally. So, for instance, with that example of a participation contract, the way that might impact disabled students is it might prioritize spoken communication in the classroom space, which isn't always accessible to students. And they often play a role in how students use power against each other in the classroom. For example, if there's a very strict test policy about the time and date and length of a test, and certain students who are usually there are not in the room, that points out to their classmates that they're disabled. And depending on how well things go on the test, that can really impact how their peers approach them in the classroom space. Okay, Screencast-O-Matic has a 15-minute limit, so I'm going to go fairly quickly through the next finding and the conclusion. So the third finding that I thought was really interesting was that students are often using the syllabus as a script. And by that I mean they're using the syllabus to provide language and formal structure when they ask for requests for disability access. In this role, the syllabus is a good job, or the syllabus helps orient the instructor and the student as they discuss accommodations. And it can work really well if it's used flexibly with both the student and the instructor. So one of the students I talked with had a great example of how he would sit down with his instructor and they'd go through the syllabus together and use that to map out the disability accommodations he might need. So here's just to wrap up some concluding thoughts for our group, what I think we can learn from these findings. The first and most important thing is that it's important to have what we call at UW an access and accommodation statement on your syllabus. I'm sure that most of us do have that, but it's useful. It's a useful reminder. And you can also think about, are there things I want to add to that are part of my teaching philosophy? The way that I do this is I have the statement and then underneath I have Dr. S's notes on this statement. And I actually do that for a lot of the different required policy language on the syllabus. And here's just a quick link. I'll post the slides to our discussion page to the DRS guidance around that. It's also important to consider if course policies and how they're communicated out to disabled students. So like that example I just gave with the testing policy. Are there, another really popular one is laptop bans. These all unintentionally can out disabled students, even if they seem to have an important pedagogical purpose for us. So that's something to think about. When you're doing things like power sharing practices, like syllabus co-design or rubric building, have a plan for if students suggest practices that might disempower disabled students. It's important to not approach that as like, okay, well, we'll just go with the whole class and or the majority, and then I'll figure out a way to accommodate you later. Like, actively invite how that might not work for some students and help them to sort of see like, oh, this practice that I am attached to might actually disadvantage other students in the class. And then one thing that I think is important for our group, with going back to that first note of like looking for signals across the syllabus, I think that disabled students are often looking for signaling across needs. So a student with a learning disability might note your document design work that benefits those using a screen reader. When you make moves, when you make any kind of access move, it makes you more legible as a person that students can come to and talk about their access related needs. And that's always really helpful for building relationships with students and also for fostering student success for disabled students in the classroom. All right, thanks for your time. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. I'll probably post a few questions, or might not, we'll see. And I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Have a great rest of the quarter.